Hello and welcome to Mental Health. It's a Trap. We're your hosts, Susan and Stephen, mother and son, unraveling the complexities of the mental health traps people fall in. Join us on this podcast journey as we demystify the mental health labyrinth, explore common issues, and provide you with tools to navigate this sometimes extremely daunting terrain. You can expect engaging conversations, personal stories, and probably also have a laugh or two. Access to mental health care should not be what causes you additional stress. We invite you to follow along, and together we can embrace the darkness. So today we're going to be talking about tips and tricks around therapy, how to find a therapist, barriers, possible solutions, and just kind of the overall experience of what a person could or has gone through in finding a therapist, or maybe even just thinking about going to therapy. I think one of the big things is people talk about not wanting to go, right? Because it's like, oh, I don't know what this is, or ooh.
Right, or just making that step to say I need help is a big step. So that's really the first step is acknowledging or identifying, like, you know what, I need some help, and that's a huge step for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, how do you navigate that? Where do you look? Who do you go to for support? Who do you call? Do you go to your primary care doctor? Do you ask family members? Do you ask friends? And that can be overwhelming and intimidating for people because now others know they're struggling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big thing, regardless of culture or religion or anything. I think that's always the same. It's always like, deal with it on your own. So your habits are like, I can't go talk to someone because it's going to be weak. Or maybe it's I've talked with my doctor and I've gotten a referral, but I haven't done anything with it. Or I got a list from my insurance company and there's like 5 pages.
Yeah, so think about talking about those lists, right? And in my profession, I've seen people get up to 30 people on a list. And, the question that I would ask is, how often are those lists updated? Because now here comes the barriers to those lists. Phone numbers are no longer in service. They don't get return phone calls to say whether they are accepting new clients or not. Talking about, do they accept my insurance? So the lists aren't really specific. They're pretty general and broad for most people. And so, by the time they get through the first 5, they're done because they don't accept the insurance. They haven't gotten a call back. Or the phone number's not even in service, and that happens too. So that can be defeating when you're struggling and then trying to make these phone calls to find someone to help.
Mm-hmm. It, makes people feel more hopeless and helpless. Because if they get to a point where they ask for help and they, in some ways, get resources, right? Because it's like, all these people, like, you're like, oh, all these options. Like, sometimes that sounds great because you're like, oh, all these people, maybe someone can help me, right? You're like, but most of the times it's like you said, like, they call, they have a long wait list, they don't take their insurance anymore, it's pay out of pocket, or you just have to pay cash. And so again, more barriers of like, oh, like, I thought I was going to get help. It took so much for me to take that step to tell a doctor or a friend, and I got resources, but now I have these other barriers. Like, what's the point?
Right, exactly. And that, just really tends to get people in a place of, why bother? I'll just figure it out on my own. which, leads people down a lot of other unhealthy paths because they're struggling. And so, I think that that's another thing, is like the cost for people. That's another big barrier, because, money is tight for a lot of people, and um, you know, having to pay that out of pocket along with everything else can get them in a space of, I'm done, I'm not going to do this, I'm just going to talk to my friend or talk to a family member. And, the downside to that is, the friend and family member is emotionally attached to them. So it's really hard for them to get the support they need in the ways that they need it.
Yeah, I think that's another big thing is life is in a box, or like in systems, right? You grow up, you go to school, you get a job, college, everything that you have to do. It's all these little things like like, and I think we get stuck in those systems, which kind of, our societal norms of, don't reach out for help, deal with it on your own, or talk with your friends, or, it's kind of like it works until it doesn't work.
Right.
And sometimes people need to get to that point to then ask for help, which is kind of sucky, because it's like you have to go through all that pain and suffer before. But then again, all the barriers that you come across of, like, even just going to therapy, it's like, it's weekly. Like when we think about systems, it's like, oh, you go to therapy once a week, for an hour, but for how long? And like, again, financially, it's like, if it's at least $100 a session, and you're like, that's my food money, or I have to pay to, childcare, my kids, my, my spouse or my partner, or I'm a caregiver, or like, it's like, how do you get help when you're like, oh, just another thing to add to my plate that's supposed to help me, but I have all these other responsibilities that therapy seems more overwhelming to add it, even though it has the upside of the potential of the support and working through those issues.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that's important for people to remember is that it's important to take care of yourself in order to attend to all the other responsibilities in life, because, when you don't do that, then you're not present for those other things, and then you start to see breakdowns throughout your life, in your relationships, in your work, and, it just makes things a whole lot more difficult. So,
yeah.
And
I think that's a big thing. I think, like, when we think about, tips and tricks, or like solutions, even things, even though it's not therapy, but like if it's like a peer support group, or if there's something specific to your issue, like whatever it is, if it's anxiety, it's depression, there's organizations like the National Alliance of Mental Illness, whether it's the person struggling with like a mental health struggle, or if it's a family member or friend, because they can go and, how do I help my friend or my uncle with, this diagnosis that they have, and they have their own education. And I think education is a good component, because even in therapy, sometimes that's what you do. You just get educated on what you're going through. And sometimes it is doing those little things, like, how do you balance, like, when do you need therapy, and when can you kind of use like supplemental supports, and education and peer groups.
Right. And I think it's, that journey and that path is different for everyone, and people have to find what their path looks like. So when you talked about boxes, we do live in boxes, and it's really important for people to think outside the box, because we are human beings at the end of the day, and we don't fit in boxes. And I do share that with a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, is that, what does your journey look like for you? What does your support system look like for you? And I remember a friend telling me years ago about pulling together strings to create many threads as a means of support, because that's what we need in life. Is, we don't get through life without support from others, and that support looks different for everyone depending on culture and even male versus female, the whole cultural thing of men don't cry and all of that plays another role, at least for men looking for therapy. And that's what women do. They just always talk about their problems and that, though that's not always true.
Yeah.
And so again, it's that boxed mentality. And I think by creating boxes and trying to live in boxes continues to create more barriers for people navigating the systems and trying to get their needs met.
It's almost like and even sometimes it's not you, but it's just like there's more walls that get built that you have to learn to take down. But there's so many of them. Which one do you work with first, right? Like sometimes that could be a big thing. Like when I go to therapy, what do I talk about? I know what my issues are, but I have a lot of issues. Which one do I talk about first? And like I think sometimes even that, or maybe someone says they know that they need help, but they don't know where to start. Then I'd be like, what do I talk about?
Well, yeah, think about that. I mean, if you have some people have more struggles than others, and so when they're looking for therapy, that's one of the things, right? So I've always thought therapy to be like finding a really good pair of shoes that fit well. They're comfortable. It's not like, wearing heels and having pain in your feet and your legs as a result of it, or wearing shoes too tight. That's what therapy is. It's about finding someone that you can connect with, that you can work with, and that you feel safe with. And I think that that's really important, and you are paying for that service. So you get to decide, is this a good fit for me or not? And, my rule of thumb was, 3 strikes and you're out. Give the person, 3 chances at the very least. Because the first time when a therapist and a client meet, it's anxiety provoking on both ends. It's the therapist saying, who's this new person coming in? Am I going to be a good fit? So sometimes a therapist is questioning their abilities, and then here's a new client coming in going, am I going to like the therapist? Can they help me? What do I say? Where do I start? And, and by the second appointment, okay, you know what they look like. You got a little feel for, how it went. And then by the third session, I think most people know at that point. And then you can have an open conversation, because I am a firm believer of going to the source and saying, this isn't really a good fit for me. Would you be able to help me find someone else? Or do you have any recommendations? And, and again, advocating for your needs. And I feel that therapists, it would be important for them to be open to that, for their clients to be able to let them know that it's not a good fit and it's nothing personal.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, right? Usually if you go buy shoes, you try on a few pairs, or like, does this one fit? Does this one not fit? Is my foot too fat? Like, I can try on a pair of 9s and they can fit okay, but if I don't get a wide, then I have to get like a 10.
Right.
So then it's like, and then again, style, like even when you think about, the different options you have, even within shoes, styles, heels, boots, sandals, like it's a variety. So when you think about connecting that with like therapists, it's the same thing, right? Because some people might have like specific issues that they want to talk about, and they want someone who specializes in that. And that can be difficult because not every therapist specializes in everything.
Right.
So you might not have the availability to see someone who can help you with that specific problem. And it could be, like you said, like someone might want a male therapist, a female therapist, maybe a non-binary therapist, someone who works in the queer community, someone who works with religion and all the different aspects and different religions there are, or culture, like someone who looks like me, or someone who understands like these specific issues. And so I think it can get difficult in trying to find someone too, but also being open to trying like at least 2 to 3 sessions, even if they don't meet everything that you have, because otherwise you're just going to sit and still be where you are and not be able to heal through things. And maybe that one person you think is not going to work for you, maybe you find out that they're perfect, so to speak, quote unquote perfect, because I think that's one of the things that a therapist could fear is like the expectation of being perfect or being the magic wand to make the client's problems go away. And it doesn't work like that. It would be nice if it did. And I'm sure a lot of therapists.
We wouldn't need therapy then.
Yeah, it'd be like, oh, poof, you talked about it. Like you would talk with your friends or your family, and it would be done. Or you talk to a stranger and be like, oh, I'm so glad I said that to you. It's all over.
Right? Yeah. If only. If only. Yeah. Yeah. I think that people. It kind of reminds me of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? And finding the just right.
Mm-hmm.
Not perfect, just right. And I think it's important for people to remember that, like you were talking about, you might find a therapist and therapists aren't skilled in all areas and they have passions for certain areas. And so that's why there's therapists that specialize in trauma, therapists that specialize in psychosis or personality disorders or anxiety or depression. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's like if I have an OBGYN issue, I'm not going to go and see a marriage therapist.
Yeah.
I might go and see a therapist who specializes more in women issues or something along those lines,
Mm-hmm.
If I have a trauma history, I'm not going to go see a therapist who does just depression and maybe some anxiety or things like that. I would probably want to go to someone who's more trauma informed and who has, certifications in helping, kind of work through trauma. And so I think it's important to kind of figure out what is it that I'm struggling with and what is the best fit for me. So I know that when Stacy died and I had to look for a therapist, one of the things that was important to me was I needed to work with someone who understood grief and sudden loss.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to know the experience of losing a child. I just couldn't go and see someone who was a marriage therapist. I had to, and I asked those specific questions when I made phone calls. Have you experienced loss personally, and or have you worked with others who have experienced loss?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very specific about the questions that I asked because I knew what I needed.
Yeah.
And, and I was very fortunate to find someone that could support me through that journey. And again, we have the right to ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they don't have to disclose personal information, obviously, though they can say, oh, yes, I have worked with people in similar situations who have had sudden loss or child loss or, loved ones, whatever the relationship is. And so it just helps to know that they may have some information and support that would be really helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important for people to know that it's your life. It's you're the driver. Mm-hmm. We're just the passengers. Though I do like to say I have my own steering wheel and brake on my side. And that, it's okay to say this isn't working or yes, this is working. And I think, to tie it back to what we were talking about is that, that people, I totally lost my train of thought there. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to you for a second while I grab my thoughts again. Woo! Brain farts are brutal.
No, that happens. I think that's a big thing is it's not something you're taught. Like, you're not taught how to ask for help. You're not taught what questions do I ask, right? Just like, oh, it's just like, go see a therapist. You need help. And it's like, excuse me? Like, it's offensive. Like, if it's someone you don't know, even if it's family members and it comes out of the blue, like, the defense walls come up and then you might be resistant to wanting the help because someone pissed you off.
Yeah. Right?
And it's kind of like a defense mechanism where it's like you're like, your body's like, oh, it's true, but your mind is like, all the swear words. But like, I think that's a good tip to have is like, whatever you're going through, even if you want to write it down, like what are you going through right now? What are the issues that are coming up for you? Is it within relationships with the people around you? Is it, struggling with your own self? Is it grief and loss? Are you anxious? Do you feel depressed or like you're not doing anything? Like, I think writing those things down's helpful because then those are the questions you want to ask. Like, oh, like, have you worked with people who have had, like you said, these issues or in trauma or whatever it might be? Because therapists will have some get their own more advanced certifications or, education to work with trauma or work with grief and loss. Because people might think like, oh, you're a therapist, you should be able to work with people who are grieving. And it's like, it doesn't work like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You get, unfortunately, I want to say, a generalized education, and then you have to go and learn. I mean, and it's just like every other kind of job is you learn as you grow, and the more people you see, the better you'll get. And, sometimes you'll find, a quote unquote bad therapist, but sometimes the person will be a bad client. Like, it goes both ways. Like, it's like,
Right,
it's a
right.
relationship, and sometimes it is us who's the problem,
Right.
and sometimes it's the therapist, or it could be like both ways.
Right, exactly. And I think I remembered the point. So we were talking about, you know, asking the questions and then saying, like, what do I need? And, if I see this therapist 3 times, now I have to go see another therapist and I have to start all over. And the one thing that I say to people is, it's not about starting over. And I've had people say to me, let's start from from birth. And I'd be like, whoa, hold on a minute there.
Yeah.
We are not starting from birth. Let's start with today. What's going on for you right now in your life? Like, what is it that you are currently struggling with? And I'm pretty transparent and say, those things will come through as they need to. So I think that relieves a lot of pressure for people coming in for the first time. And then the other part is sometimes we work with a therapist and they can only bring us so far based on their own experience and their own education and their field of passion, right? So they can bring a person to a certain point. And then it could be that an individual could work with another therapist and work on a different area. So it's not about starting over. It's about building the foundation and building the bricks from one brick to the next. And again, it doesn't mean people have to be in therapy for the rest of their life. It just means that, when you feel like you've met those goals with the therapist that you're working with, you set a whole new set of goals if you want to continue in therapy and you feel like you need that.
Yeah, or take a break.
Or take a break.
I think sometimes people get stuck in or dependent on a therapist. Like, oh, this therapist, oh, like, I love seeing them. I haven't seen them for 20 years. And it's like, good, okay. Sounds like you have a good connection with your therapist. But then again, for like 20 years, like, is it now because I think one of the interesting things is like, oh, and I heard this before, like, your therapist is like your paid friend or you're like your client's paid friend. And I'm like, why would you, like, I get it, but then I'm like, I feel like it's more harmful to be like, oh, you're paying this person as your friend, because then it's
Well, it
not the
can be.
relationship that you have.
Right. Well, it can be more harmful. And is it medically necessary? And is it ethical? So those are the questions that a therapist needs to ask herself or himself working with clients, is to say, are we working on goals? Have we met those goals? I worked with a patient recently, and I saw her, we do short-term through primary care, 8 to 12 appointments, and she probably did about 6. And our last appointment, she, we checked in, and then it was like, I think that we can, and this was the client saying, I think we can end now because it feels like, we're just filling time. And I said, okay, we did a termination, and she knows if she needs to come back, she can do that. And she's learned what she's needed to for this time in her life. And off she went. And, and that's when it's good. Like, both of you recognize that you've met the goal of why you came in initially. And again, therapy can be episodic. It can be, come and go as you need it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people need it like weekly for a length of time.
Mm-hmm.
And other people just need short intervals of it. And so, again, it's like, think out of the box. What do I need?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you stay in the box, then you start creating these unhealthy situations where you're hanging out with your therapist or the therapist hanging out with the client.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then boundaries can become more blurred and it can create a whole lot of other issues. So, the goal of therapy is to work through something, whatever it is, to graduate and to come back in for a tune-up as needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we look at therapy more that way, people would be more open to it because, mental health is still stigmatized and, it's like, don't talk about the things that happen in the home or don't talk about the things that happened in your life. Keep it behind the closed doors, which is, I think, created a monster in and of itself of, a society so afraid to reach out for help for fear of being judged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like always that negative like self-talk or negative like self-criticism or like that fear. It's like, oh, like what will people think of me? And it's like it's really easy to say like, oh, who cares? But in the person's mind, like, they care. I care. Like,
well, we all care.
If I'm gonna go to therapy and like I'm like, oh no, like, what are these people gonna think if I like ask for help or if I talk about my problems with like the stranger? Like, it's easy to say like, don't care about it, like, right? As I think, we need to be careful about like, silver lining things. Like, yes, it's beneficial, but also it's like, what you feel is real. Like, I think sometimes even helping someone get to that point is just being like, yeah, it's scary to ask for help, or it's scary to see a therapist, or it's like scary to like want to work on what you're going through, because sometimes it can be worse at first because you're dealing with you're bringing it up, but you're also giving your body and your mind a way to get it out.
Right.
So it's going to come up and it's not going to feel good, but as you get it out, it's different. And then as time goes on, like you said, like in therapy, like it could be therapy for a week for a little bit, and then it could go to every other week, and then once a month, and then every 6 months, maybe you just go and you just do a quick little check-in, or whenever something comes up, you can go back, like, if needed.
Right. Well, then there's the barrier of waitlist. So that can be, that can be really challenging. And, when I worked in community mental health, people were afraid to get better because they wouldn't get the support that they needed.
Mm-hmm.
They really struggled to see their ability to do things on their own because we create this space of, you have to depend on us and we're going to help you and we're going to take care of you. And and really our goal is to help people help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. It's not about us taking care of others and fixing things. It's about helping people find their path and their journey in their life to the best of their ability. And that ability or that journey is different for everyone. If you have someone with a diagnosis of schizophrenia and they can, manage a home and drive a car and do laundry and cook their own meals and grocery shopping and pay bills, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other people might be able to go to work and, do all those same chores and responsibilities. And so I think it really is individual in that way of what is this person able to do with supports or with minimal supports or with no supports,
Mm-hmm. It's huge. I mean, depending on where you live, there might be no therapists, or there might be one, and you're like, I don't want to see that one.
Exactly.
Right? Or their wait list is so long that it's like, I can't go to that person. Like, now I have nothing. Right? And I think one of the pluses is like, especially around with COVID, is like telehealth has opened up. COVID has opened up telehealth services.
Right.
And so like wherever you are, it doesn't matter. Like if you're in a rural town, like you, and if you're open to either video or like therapy over the phone, that you can see anyone in the state that either accept your insurance, or if they have a sliding scale fee, so it's a lower cost, or depending on the issue, like if it's grief and loss, there's a lot of hospices that will do like sometimes free one-on-one services for grief counseling.
Right.
So yeah, I think it just depends on like the issue, like what you're going through. I mean, one of the biggest resources that I usually have shared in the past is Psychology Today, mainly because it's a directory where you can look and enter everything that you need. Your zip code, if you're looking for a male, female therapist, a career therapist, religious therapist, your insurance, sliding scale fee. They'll have a profile, so it lets you look through it. I mean, it's not perfect,
Right.
Same, they might have wait lists. They might not accept your insurance. They might be out of network with your insurance, even though they say that they're in network with your insurance.
Right.
So there's a lot of like navigating that can like complicate things, but also help because you get to kind of
Right.
pick what you want. But sometimes if you pick too much,
Right. You have to be careful with the filters, because the more filters you put, the more restrictions you have. So your pool gets less and less, because I do use psychologytoday.com when I'm supporting others finding therapists longer term in the community. And so, I do use that. It's a tool that I use. I've been pretty successful with it in finding therapists for individuals. And, the more, and like, yeah, it's great because you can put the insurance, you can select religion, you can select specific issues, gender, age. There's a lot of filters that you can use. Though I've noticed the more filters you put on, and if you're in a rural town, putting the city that's closest to you gives you more to choose from with your insurance. And so, and so sometimes even looking online can be there's a lot of barriers. It's still, I need to call because I don't know if they accept my insurance. And, the good thing about psychologytoday.com is they're usually pretty good about keeping that profile up to date. You get to read a little bit about the individual, where they work, their website if they have it, and they'll put the insurances that they accept. They put the issues that they deal with, their specialties, and and I think that's another thing where you talked about very generalized therapy. That therapists can work with a lot of things, though specialize in certain things. So I think that's important to remember when looking for a therapist, because they may have 20 to 30 issues that they have checked off, though they may specialize. So you have to look at the specialty too and say, what is it they really specialize in? Because I think that can be helpful in finding a better fit.
Yeah. Well, we hope you all enjoyed this episode. Again, if you have any questions, any thoughts, feedback, if there's something that we mentioned that you want to know more about or kind of want to hear, our thoughts and opinions, please feel free to leave a comment, and we will, work together and have that conversation. And we want to make sure that we can build and bring value to our listeners, to you. And we know that, through our own, struggles, sometimes therapy might not be an option. So maybe another podcast might be like, if it's not an option, like, what can you do? Right? So we thank you for listening, and take care.